Hey everybody, this is TJR. Musician, music producer, and YouTube vlogger extraordinaire Rick Beato has released a video entitled How Computers Ruined Rock Music. In this video, he discusses and illustrates to great effect how quantization, or the quantizing of recorded music to a computer grid, has basically drained the life out of popular music, and especially rock and roll, since the early 2000s. I watched this video today, and I agree with him 100%. And I am making this video as a response of sorts because there are a few things I want to add to this conversation. And I also want to bring up one thing that he didn't mention that I feel also needs to be considered when we have this conversation. Now, I will get to that last sentence later, but first, I want to state I've always known about this practice, the quantizing of recorded tracks, but I never did a video about it because, for one, I lack access to the kinds of tracks that Rick Beato has access to. Every time I watch one of his What Makes This Song Great videos, I always feel like Jack Nicholson's version of the Joker in the 1989 Tim Burton Batman movie, where he has that line, "Where does he get those wonderful toys?" I'm always asking, where does he get these tracks? Because he's using the tracks from the actual recording sessions that he's talking about. I love his videos, but where does he get these? I wish I had access to those, but hey, more power to him. He's made some really great videos because he does have access to them. But also, the other reason why I've never made a video discussing this topic is because I don't know how to quantize my recordings. I've never quantized any of my recordings because I don't know how, nor do I want to. So I really can't demonstrate how you do it. Given his skills and the access to the kinds of tracks that he does have, I have to admit I'm surprised that he hasn't done a video on this topic sooner, but I'm very glad that he has because I feel he brilliantly illustrates this. If you haven't seen this video yet, I recommend you go watch it. I'm assuming you're here because you have seen it. Now, there are a few things I want to add to this. Musicians who play really well have a great sense of timing. It just goes hand in hand. One thing that Rick Beato demonstrates is that even humans with the best sense of timing, they are never machine-like perfect in the way that computers are. And when even the best of us play, there are little nuances to how we play. We might play slightly in front of the beat at one point, or slightly behind the beat at another point, and then we catch up to the beat later on. This is part of what he describes as the groove, the feel of the song. This is the human element. And in his video, he gives a great example of how in the recording for Back to Black by AC/DC, that song ranges anywhere between 90 beats per minute to 95 beats per minute throughout the entire song. No one has ever noticed this. No one has ever pointed out and said, hey, that's not absolutely perfect. No, because it's those little variances in playing. And AC/DC, great musicians. They have groove, they have feel. But like the rest of us, and like the best of us, they're not perfect. But it is those variations, those little imperfections, that give the song its groove. It's what gives it that human element. It comes with those variances. It comes with those imperfections. And none of that in that recording was removed by quantizing it. Now, just like in my video where I talked about live bands using backing tracks the right way versus the wrong way, there is actually a right way that you can use quantizing in recorded music. Let's say you get that perfect recorded track from start to finish, but there's one little spot where the timing falls too far off, where the variance is not subtle enough, and it's noticeable in a bad way. Now, you might just have to retake the whole track all over again. Or you might be able to salvage it with a quick overdub. Or you might be able to salvage it by quantizing just that one part. And in that case, if it works, if it doesn't sound artificial, quantizing can be a time saver in the recording studio and can be a money saver as well. But in the situations that Rick Beato describes in his video, where you literally quantize every single measure of every single track on a performance that doesn't need it even. Just because you want every single beat, every single measure to time out with machine-like precision, you are removing all the groove and feel out of the music. You are doing it the wrong way. And that describes, unfortunately, too much of today's modern recorded music. Not long ago, I had a conversation with a young coworker, mid-20s, who told me how much he loved classic rock, especially Led Zeppelin. And he said, I don't understand why so much of today's music just doesn't have that kind of excitement. I described the use of quantization to him. Also, I talked about how a lot of music is created by, say, recording the chorus of the song just once, and then just cutting and pasting that same recording of the chorus in each spot where you need it, so it sounds exactly the same each time. And this is why record producers quantize, so they only have to record that part once, then they can just cut and paste and repeat it. Rick Beato talks about this too in his video as well. If you play and sing the chorus each time, there are going to be little variances. Even if you try to sing it and play it the same way each time, there's going to be just little variances to how you sing it, to how you play it. Even though you are playing the same chords, even though you are basically singing the same notes. And this creates sometimes very subtle, even subconscious variances that can add a lot of excitement to the performance. Whereas if you just record the chorus once and then just cut and paste it where you need it throughout the song, you are draining out a lot of that excitement and you are draining out a lot of that feel. I also talked to him about the ending of Rock and Roll on Led Zeppelin 4. The band comes to a stop and then Plant sings that lonely, 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 and he pauses, time, and he stretches out that note. There's a slight pause, and then John Bonham plays this short drum solo. I don't even want to say fill, it's more like a little solo. And then there's this pause, very slight pause, and the band, bam, they all hit the closing together. When was the last time you heard an ending like that on any radio hit, any modern radio hit? You probably haven't heard anything like that lately because you can't quantize that sort of thing. It's impossible. You only get this kind of thing when the band plays in the same room together and works out the song. And by this time, Led Zeppelin had had a ton of live experience with each other. And when you have that experience with each other, you play live all the time, there's a certain instinct that those musicians obtain with each other, a certain form of communication, to where you can almost predict what the other player is going to do sometimes. And when Bonham's playing that drum solo there, and you're waiting for the ending, and you're not sure where it's going to go, and one night he might play it one way, another night he might play another way, and you're looking at each other, there's some eye contact, and you just know, okay, here's where he's going to do it. And maybe he gives a little signal. Maybe he clicks his sticks together one time, and you know, bam, now we hit. And sometimes that hit isn't always 100% perfect, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have an excitement to it. And it's things like this that is so missing from so much of today's recorded music. Now, not all of today's music is recorded this way. There are tons of great rock and pop records that don't do this, but I would guess a majority of them are not on major labels, and a majority of them you're not hearing on radio. A musicologist once explained to me how in Led Zeppelin, John Paul Jones, the bass player, pretty much played on the beat by and large. John Bonham, the drummer, had a tendency to play slightly behind the beat. Jimmy Page, the guitarist, had a tendency to play slightly ahead of the beat. And then Robert Plant was just kind of weaving throughout all of them. It's this dynamic that he told me, it created a tension to how they played and to the music that they created. And this tension created an excitement that only they had. It's a chemistry that only this band has. And all great bands that stay together for a long time have a chemistry that they develop. U2 is a good example. Their chemistry is not the same as Led Zeppelin's, but they definitely have their own chemistry. Now, there is one other thing, though, that I would like to also add to this conversation that wasn't mentioned in his video, and that's not a diss on him. He was talking about the use of computers. He was talking about quantizing primarily. He talked a little bit about autotune. But what I want to talk about has more to do with the back end of production on records, and I've mentioned this before. And this, of course, is the overcompression of recorded music that began somewhere around the same time. What is commonly referred to as the Loudness Wars, when we began, or I should say, music producers, engineers, record labels began to discover that they could compress the music to make it louder, which means it would pop out of speakers and hit you harder when you first heard it, like, say, on radio. It would basically get your attention quicker. And so the idea was, well, if we make it louder, people will notice it when they first hear it, and they're more likely to pay attention. And this led to an escalation where then another record label, another record producer, another engineer would say, well, let's compress ours a little bit more so that it will also pop and it'll be more noticeable. And this began an escalation trend where everybody was trying to outdo the other and make their record louder, make their record louder, make their record louder, to the point where what happened is we lost the dynamic range of a music performance. When you play music, even if you're playing metal music, there's dynamic range to how you play and sing. You might have more exaggerated moments where you sing more softly or louder. There might be moments where you hit your guitar slightly harder, maybe not as hard. The same thing with drums. And this is true with any type of music that you play. There are just going to be nuances, some of them much more noticeable, some of them much less noticeable, but they're still there nonetheless. And when you compress music to make it louder, you remove the differences between those quieter moments to those louder moments, and everything's at the same volume. The example I always use is that in motion pictures, you have moments that are very quiet. You have moments that are very loud. Well, what if you had an entire 2-hour movie where everything was loud, everything was explosions and crashes, people yelling and screaming, gunshots firing for 2 hours? That would get boring after a while, and you would be fatigued from that. You have to have those quieter moments to give it balance. Music works the same way. And when you slowly bring the lower parts to the same part as the louder parts, or I should say the quieter parts to the same level as the louder parts, suddenly you have no more dynamic range, and you have drained and bled out the excitement of the performance. And this can happen whether you quantize the music or not. I know I've discussed this before in my CD versus vinyl videos, but I just feel it needs to be brought up in reference to this as well. Once again, this began around the 2000s and persisted it persisted long enough to where it eventually, I believe, helped to kill rock and roll music, just as Rick Beato has stated in his video. I do believe now that there is a lot of really good rock music that is being released. It's not getting on the radio, but it is being released where they are not doing this, where they're going for groove, for feel, they're going for that human element. So what it's going to take next is for a couple of really good bands who are lucky enough to break into radio to break that barrier, because most of today's popular music is exactly recorded in the way that's been described. So it's going to take one of these bands that's not doing it this way to break through, get a hit on the radio, and it's going to take a couple of times and a couple of bands to break through on radio and get hits before we start doing things differently again. Because I hate to say it, a lot of the music industry, they're followers. They're going to do what radio is going to play. You can hardly blame them, because in order to make money, they have to get on the radio. And so they're going to keep just making the kind of music that radio is going to play, which is music that has been recorded in this way, because this is what radio feels the general public wants to hear. Anyways, that's my response to Rick Beato's video, How Computers Ruin Rock Music. It's an excellent video. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you go check it out. I will put a link here for you to check out. What are your thoughts on this video? What comments would you add? Is there anything else that needs to be added to this conversation? Please let me know. Leave a comment. As always, if you like what I'm doing, be sure to click like, be sure to click subscribe, smash the notifications button so you can know when I release new videos. I want to give a big thank you to Rick Beato for just making an excellent video and getting me fired up about this topic. And I want to give a big thank you for all my patron supporters who are helping me to keep making more videos. If you'd like to become a patron supporter, please follow the link here that will be hanging up overhead very soon. And patron supporters do get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content that no one else does. I'm also going to be very soon creating other perks for the patron supporters as well. Stay tuned for that. Everybody, as always, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.